All right. Hello, everyone. This is Conversations with Rob, now called Fire Breathing Rob. Just trying to spice up the commentary a little bit. We report on our show politics, life-changing stories. We also have done a lot of other different stories. We did a story with people with disabilities too. So we try to mix it up here on the channel, and I hope people like it. And I hope people like it also on the radio. And thank you guys for listening on the radio. We're going to kick it around today. I have a special guest, and you may have, if you read People magazine, seen the story about Michelle Anderson. She is a life coach, a writer, a speaker, and also a therapeutic horseback rider, and also a burn survivor. She's going to get more into that. I don't want to take more away from her story. I want her to explain it to the viewers and also myself. Michelle, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the program. We greatly appreciate having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So as I said, I didn't want to take too much of going into your background or your story. Could you just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Michelle Lauren Anderson, and as you said, I do a wide variety of stuff, but everything that I do is intended to share my story and experiences and knowledge to help others gain the tools and motivation to help them be their best selves and eventually thrive. So whether that's through writing, life coaching, speaking, or rather therapeutic riding or horseback riding, my goal and purpose, I feel like, in life is to just share my experiences and knowledge with others to help them be their best selves.
All right. And thank you for that. So, Michelle, can we just talk a little bit about the People magazine stories? As you said, there's so much to devolve with you. We could be talking with you for about 2 or 3 hours on all sorts of different situations. But I do want to talk rather quickly about the People magazine article. Can you talk briefly about the accident that happened to you and just basically how you persevered through it? I mean, I know I read the article. It happened to you at a young age of 2 years old, I believe, but how you persevered through it and how you're still persevering through it right now in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was burned at 2 years old. According to the Minnesota State Fire Marshal Report, it was caused by careless cigarette smoking. But the truth behind the cause and the details are still kind of unclear. But I was burned 91% of my body, and I've had skin grafting on roughly 70% of my body. And today I've had over 80 surgeries throughout my life because I was burned at such a young age. I had to have a lot of skin releases and reconstruction as I grew because my skin that was burned didn't grow with me. And so it really wasn't just surviving the initial injury, it was the continual effect that it kind of kept having on my life throughout my entire childhood, teen, and young adult years. And so what's really allowed me to persevere through it all has been my strength and support of my family, as well as my love and passion for animals and horses. And that's what eventually drove me to my love for helping others through animals and specific. So, yeah. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I do want to get into that happened to you at a young age, so you probably don't remember as much as, if it happened to somebody at 14 or 13. And that's, happened a while ago. Can you talk about, stuff that went on throughout life? After that happened, it must have been an extremely tough experience, especially at a young age. But going through all those operations at such a young age, I mean, that must have been really hard. I get a scratch on my leg and I cry like a little baby. You going through 80 surgeries, that's incredible. So can you kind of talk about what you do remember out of, going through those at such a long period in time, all those surgeries?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we are going to get up to talking about this later, but I was going to, the book I am writing about my story, Survivor Not Victim, I actually go in depth more about them. And a lot of people assume, that you're burned. Oh, it's about the initial injury and the story. But for me, what I remember is what happened afterwards and the stories I had when I was older and how that affected my life. And so the initial surgeries and the initial story, what happened to me, isn't really my story so much. What's my story is the stories that happened later, and when I had to have, arm surgery and foot surgery and couldn't walk for, 6 weeks and was in a wheelchair, and then had to have another surgery, and kind of the never ending piece of it all. So the hardest piece, I think, was that it never really ended, and that my injury kind of kept affecting me, and I always thought it would end. And it, every growth spurt, every time we kind of get back to normal living, we had to go back. And I had to have another surgery, and it just, you move forward, and to us, that was our normal, and that was, I say us as in my sister and my mom and I and my family. Um, but, it definitely changed life, and it definitely made things harder. My peers and friends were out, like working or doing sports, and I had to go have surgery during our break. And it just, changed a lot. But to me, that was just kind of all I knew, and that's what I
Right.
what I had to go through. And so it just kind of became a part of life, even though there isn't really anything normal about it.
Right. Michelle Anderson, who has been in People Magazine, is telling her story right now here on Fire Breathing Rob. Let's move into kind of basically to hit on what you just said about, we as young people in our 20s and 30s are more understanding about people with disabilities, people that have imaging issues, and all kinds of other issues in general in life that, gay people, it's growing up more as life goes on. Can you talk about that? And as far as with so you just spoke about bullying, are you still being bullied, do you feel like, or do you feel like people have come to accept, we see a lot of people that as far as modeling, people are beautiful in all different ways, skinny, heavy. Do you feel like people are more understanding to, how the burns went now than they were maybe earlier on in your life?
I would say no. I would say, my last doctor's appointment for my hands, the doctor, we asked him, what should I, um, if he had any suggestions on like physicians or things to do. And he basically just suggested amputating my hands, and
Jeez.
told me that I was a hard patient to work on and that I owe him a boat. And so, the bullying that hurts the most is the one that comes from affluent people, and the medical professionals you're forced to be vulnerable with because they're
Yeah.
there to help you. And so, when people think of bullying, they think of, the mean kid or this and that. And that, yeah, that's a huge piece of it. But there's also that piece of bullying in our culture that comes from people that are above you or have this power above, and they intentionally don't respond in empathy and are only seeing things from their perspective. And so, no, in some ways it's actually gotten worse as I've gotten, um, as I've become an adult. Like,
Right.
when I was working in a event center for a while, back in undergrad and college, I had people approach me all the time and just say things just because I was in a leadership position there and helping coordinate events. And the people that would say things and respond was way worse than anything I ever was told as a um, child. And so I think, it just depends on who it's coming from and the
Yeah.
areas. Like on a day-to-day basis in Minnesota, where I'm from, people are very nice and very kind because that's the culture here. People, don't really say things that's the Minnesota nice, but like
Yeah.
when when I'm in a position um, where people can approach me, or they, don't they don't actually get to know me for the person. They just jump to conclusions or assumptions. Like the doctor, he just ran to assumptions and conclusions just because I was there for my hands and because of my scars. He didn't even look at, the fact that I'm finishing my master's degree or any of this, and that I ride horses and I'm completely functional. He just jumped to that conclusion because he saw my scars. And that's what's hurtful about it, is it's not that the comment necessarily, it's that he didn't even bother to get to know my history, my past, any of that. It was just, or everything that I'm doing, he just jumps to conclusions and decides to set limitations because I have physical scars and differences.
Doesn't sound like a great doctor. Sounds like he should not be helping people as far as in the medical profession. Seems like he needs to go back to Dr. 101 school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that you went through that. That really bothers me too, as a person, just a regular person. But I just want to move on to one more question about that incident. You have a tattoo on your neck. It says "Survivor, not Victim," and I believe that's the title of your book, correct?
Yep, survivor, not victim, stories behind my scars.
Okay, so what does that statement mean to you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. This is definitely a concept that I strongly believe in enough to write a whole book about it. And so, you know, just to kind of, you can be a survivor or and a victim, you know, physically, but when I say survivor, not victim, I'm meaning more so on a mental aspect, and that can relate to everyone and how we live our life. And so, you know, at the point of my initial injury, you know, I was a victim to what happened to me, but now I've survived and I've overcome and I've learned how to be a survivor. And that's what I mean by I'm a survivor and not a victim, right? And so in my book, I talk about the survivor lessons that I've learned through my life as a burn survivor. And each chapter is a different survivor lesson. So each of us have a choice on, do we view ourselves as survivors or victim of our circumstances and what happens to us? And so, you know, it's a concept that I really believe in, that if we see ourselves as survivors and learn to overcome and then thrive, you know, we're able to live a life of thriving. But if we're continually viewing ourselves as victims to every single thing that happens to us, we're going to always be limited by that mindset and factor. And so that's, you know, basically what it means is that I chose to, you know, be a survivor and fight and survive, you know, my burn injury, but also, you know, the surgeries and the setbacks that's come with it, the infections, the, you know, wound healing problems, all that, and rise above all of it, and with that mindset, but then not let it continually victimize me and bring me back down to being a victim again.
Lastly, well, first of all, I just want to say this: you're an inspiration to not only people that are burn victims, but what you've done as far as riding horses. We'll get into that down in a minute. And also, you know, achieving a master's degree as a person that has a master's degree, it's incredibly tough. So you are an inspiration to that. And people that disrespect anybody, whether it's something that's happened to you, somebody with a disability, somebody that looks or acts different, they have a problem with this themselves in general. It's not you or not anybody else. So I just wanted to say that so the viewers also hear that. It's a problem with the person that makes fun of another person in general. I want to get lastly on the topic, and then I want to get into your other activities. As far as, gee, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. As far as the burns and the operations, how does that limit you as far as day-to-day life? Do you have any limits, or has the surgeries really helped, you know, kind of get rid of a lot of the limits that you did have maybe earlier on in life?
Yeah, I would say have fought extremely hard to not have limitations, um, and have learned how to make adaptations so that it doesn't limit me. But of course, there are things that like I could probably do, but it's not going to be good for me, right? And so I do have some hand pain as well as foot pain, but as long as I'm mindful and I always kind of ask the question, like, is this benefiting my body or harming my body? So I can probably, you know, get myself to do certain things, but it's not going to benefit my body, right? And so, you know, I have to be careful what shoes I wear and make sure that I don't overstrain my hands or go like on my hands and toes too much. And typing, I'd be really mindful of. And I don't have temperature regulation very well, and so extreme heat and extreme cold, like I don't sweat wherever I have spin grafting, so in 70% of my body. So I get overheated really easily. And when I was younger and did a lot of horse showing, I would very much ignore it and just get heat exhaustion, which was not healthy. And so now I've had to learn how to be like, okay, I'm getting too hot, go sit in the air conditioning or in front of a fan for a while and then go back out. And so, you know, all of us have limitations in some way or form, right? It's just acknowledging it so that you can make adaptations, but not acknowledging it in a way as using it as an excuse or reason that you can't do something. And so I always look at like, yeah, there's things that I can't necessarily do in the same way, but I'm going to acknowledge it so that it doesn't become a limiting factor. And that way I can make adaptations and not have it prevent me from doing the things that I want to do in the life I want to live, but not use it as an excuse or reason not to do something.
Thank you for being extremely positive. I need to be more like you as far as positivity in life. And I think a lot of our viewers do also, from stuff that I've heard them say also. Anyway, we'll move on. I want to talk about your relationship with your sister. everybody knows up as a, person that has a sister, we all, don't like what other people do. We fight at times. It's a part of growing up. Can you talk about the issues that you've had as far as going so close to your sister? I watched the interview with both you guys, and it's like almost like she's your left hand, you're her right hand as far as that. Can you talk about that, the trials and tabulations you went through with her growing up? We all, like I said, we all have that, but in your case, it was a little bit different.
Yeah, so I should say we're identical twins, right? We're actually mirror twins. And so, what that means is she's basically supposed to be like my mirror. I'm right-handed, she's left-handed. Growing up, if I lost a tooth on the right side, she loses it on the left. Like we're mirrors of each other's. And so you can imagine as a burn survivor myself, and then her, she wasn't burned at all. How that impacts your relationship when you have someone that looks just like you but wasn't burned and doesn't have scars. But then also on her side of it, that she ended up being kind of the caretaker and the big sister all of a sudden. And she, was there and saw it all. And so she was greatly impacted directly by it in a very different way than I was, right? Even though I was having the physical procedures and had the scars, she was the one answering the questions and stares from other people. She was the one in the waiting room, so it greatly impacted us on both sides of it. But as we got older, and this is, what the People magazine articles about, is how, siblings can, I think, naturally have a little bit of that competitive tendencies towards each other, right? And so we were always very competitive with each other, and but very close at the same time. And when I was having a lot of surgeries and setbacks from my injury, I just couldn't compete with her. And she was, super competitive in synchronized swimming and got really into music and was really good at school. And I couldn't compete. I would try and just sucked at it essentially. But, and so, as a, young teenager, like, my mom will always say, like, it's important to have something that you're good at to, build self-esteem and gain that sense of self. And so she tried really hard and encouraged me to find like my own thing. And that's when our relationship became a lot closer, is when we found our own individuality separate from each other. But she got really into swimming and competitive synchronized swimming. And then I got really into horses after attending a burn camp for burn survivors in Colorado. And then eventually my love for horses grew, and I was able to get my own horse and compete and show. And then that's when we became, I think, even closer to where we have our own lives, but we're, best friends and very close. And it's interesting, if people meet us together, they're like, oh, they're very similar. But if they meet us separately and learn that we can have our own lives, they look at us very differently. Like we're two totally different people. And we're, we're very similar. And you can see, like, we talk with the same gestures and kind of talk in the same way, but we have like our own lives and do our own thing. And that's what ultimately like saved our relationship and our friendship. Because if I continually tried to do everything that she was doing and just was put in the same sports and activities, there would have been no way I would have been able to compete with her, and it would have probably destroyed me, because I would have just continually tried to, and there was no competition because I was having surgeries and she wasn't. And so finding our own self and figuring out who we are is what brought us close to be, best friends today.
So on a little bit of a lighter note, and you transitioned extremely well into this, let's talk about horseback riding. I rode a horse maybe 2 or 3 times. It was an experience that I'll never forget, because it was really enjoyable. It was really relaxing. We actually had a woman on here before, a couple of months back. She does yoga with horses, and she talked about that. So that was really interesting. So we do have a little bit of talk as far as animals goes on here on the program. But let's get back to you. What started your love for riding and taking care of, rather, horses?
Yeah, so my love of horses grew or developed when I was attending a camp for burn survivors in Colorado, Chile, Colorado burn camps. And at the camp, when you're 13 or older, 13 to 18, you get to go on an out camp. So like 3 days away from the main camp, either hiking, with backpacking. You can go on, like, now they have a water rafting one, horseback. So I had to go on a horseback, and I completely like fell in love with horses there. And so when I got home from camp, I immediately told my mom I wanted to take horseback riding lessons. And she kind of resisted a little bit because, you know, horses are a little bit dangerous. It's not the cheapest hobby either, right? And I literally begged her every single day for like a year until she signed me up for lessons. I was not going to take no for an answer. And so finally she gave in, and I took riding lessons, and then eventually 1 lesson a week turned to 2 lessons a week. And then I was just finding like every excuse and reason to go to the barn and spend more time with horses, right? And then eventually I was able to get my own horse, about a year and a half later, Maxie. And then we got her. I'd never had any intention of getting into showing or competing, but the very goal-oriented mindset that I have, and it's very little bit of a competitive drive. I got into showing and competing, and showed at all the local and regional shows with her. And then I decided to pursue my bachelor's degree in animal science, equine management, and then I also went on and got my therapeutic riding certification through PATH International, which is the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship. And so it really drove my passion to help others through animals and work with others and animals in that way. And so, yeah, so I still am living my life working with animals and working with people and helping them also foster their love for animals and help them.
So let's talk dive more a little deeper into this. As a person like you, as you said, just stated, you're a certified therapeutic horseback riding instructor. What does that do? I know I've heard a lot of people that do have, being somebody that's from the disability community in general, that ride horses, people that have autism, and it really kind of calms them down. It's a great activity and is therapeutic. But can you tell people why that is therapeutic and about the certificate in general?
Yeah. We'll start with the certification process. There's a couple different therapeutic riding certifications, and I won't go into all that, but therapeutic horseback riding is all it is adaptive riding. You can take riding lessons and work with horses, and that can naturally have a therapeutic component to it. The piece of the certification is to teach you how to make those adaptions, and then also pair up a horse and rider to help it be more therapeutic, as well as what does it look like if you're partnering with a mental health professional, which an equine specialist and mental health professional would be EFP, equine facilitated psychotherapy. Equine assisted learning, EAL, is focused more on learning with horses and learning like life skills. And then there's therapeutic riding, which is teaching riding with making adaptions. So you're just learning riding skills with adaptions with a therapeutic component to it. And then there's hippotherapy, which is where you're partnering with a physical or occupational therapist and a therapeutic riding instructor, and you're focusing on the therapy goals of it. And so depending on which area you choose to go into may depend on what your focus is and what your objective is, right? If you're going into it wanting to learn how to ride and work with horses, it's different than using the horse in a way to help you gain more physical strength, as well as working with horses in that way. So I always like to outline that because there's different approaches depending on what your goals are and what you need in life. So, as a therapeutic riding instructor, that's kind of the first step I take is, okay, what is it that you're looking for? What are your goals, and how can I help you get there, right? And so, and then also a piece I look at is the facility, and is the horses that we have going to be a good fit too, because not all riders can necessarily accommodate at the facility on that, and it's just every place has different limitations. Making sure that it's a good fit too, because otherwise it's not going to be a good experience, right? And so on the physical aspect, the reason that the horse is so therapeutic on the physical aspect is the horse's movement is the same actually as our walk. It uses the same three-dimensional movement. And so if you think of if a person were to sit in a therapy room and try to recreate it, it's pretty hard and kind of boring, right? And so just by sitting on the horse and having the horse walk, the rider's flexibility, muscle strength, there's the sensory integration, it's all moving your body in the same way that you do when you walk. And so if you have a rider that's has some physical disabilities or limitations and we're not able to walk, they can sit on a horse and use all those muscles, and eventually their body will gain those muscles, so that way they can gain more strength to help them walk, right? So that's the physical aspect of it. And there's things that the occupational physical therapist can do to even help with that even more, right? And then on the mental, emotional level, horses, all animals, like dogs too, they live in the present moment and they communicate more so through their nonverbal language rather than through voice like we do, right? And so it provides, and horses, they provide immediate feedback based on our actions and the emotions that we're giving off. And so, if you go into working with a horse and you're extremely angry or upset about something, they're going to feel that and sense that emotion. If you go in and you're not very confident and you're feeling really nervous and unsure, they're going to feel that, right? And so to work with horses, and you have to have that self-awareness and learn how to control your emotions, and they can really help with that process. And the great thing about animals too is that they're not judgmental. They're very open, so you can go work with a horse, and it's different than like if you're sitting in a therapy session where you're like, oh, is this person gonna judge me? Like, what if I say something wrong? Like, you don't worry about that. You're just present, and the horse takes you for who you are that day, and they can sense the emotions that you're feeling without you even telling them, and then they can help you work through that if you are open to it and have that self-awareness. And that's what is so cool about working with horses and helping others achieve their goals, whether in that way or whether it's just riding goals too. But even if it's just riding goals, both these implement into it in some way or form.
Right. So you answered like about 100 questions I had in my brain. So thank you for that. But I do want to dive a little bit deeper into that. Let's talk about, so you talked about kind of the certifications, I guess you would say. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, about what an instructor does. What people do you usually help as, being in this sort of position?
Yeah, I'm work kind of at two different facilities, mostly at one. And so one of the facilities I'm at, we're not set up to take riders with a lot of physical disabilities. We just don't have the lift to get them on the horse safely. And, you need those tools and resources. Yeah, the other one does. And so right now I'm currently I've taken a lot of riders on that have anxiety and some depression. And that seems to be a focus that I've worked a lot on. I've worked with riders that have some minor disabilities that if you were to look at them, you wouldn't even know about it, and so that kind of tends to be the focus that I've worked with, more people that, average people that you would come across that you wouldn't even know would have these things that they may need help with, but they just need someone to help them make adaptations in small ways or forms. That tends to be the area that I've been focused on most lately, but I've worked with riders that have CP, autism, a number of other disabilities too. It just depends on where I'm at and also who comes. So, but I definitely have my passion definitely is working with people that want to achieve like riding goals and to move forward, or working with people with trauma survivors too, and using the horse to help them overcome their traumas. So that would be working with mental health professional in EFP setting, equine facilitated psychotherapy. So my focus has definitely drifted more towards helping riders overcome if they have some anxiety or they have low confidence, at working with a horse or in life in a different way and helping them get through there. And then either I'll keep working with them or they'll go somewhere, and then they'll achieve their goal in that way. And that's kind of the niche that I really like to work on with people more so than anything. So
Thank you for sharing that. I want to move more into the horseback riding. So as a person that, I've been on the horse 3 times, but we have a lot of people that, don't know anything about horses. They jump on the horse. What would you give somebody that's a first-time rider as far as advice? As you said, the horses, just like any other animal, dogs, cats, can sense how a person is. They can feel the emotions of that person. So if they're not confident, they can sense that. So what would you give as far as a first-time rider, as far as advice?
yeah, absolutely. I think as people, we're very used to cars and machines or computers where we get in our car and it brings us from A to B and we're we're used to the, machine type attitude. And oftentimes I've noticed people expect the same from horses. They expect to get on the horse, and they expect if they ask the horse to go this way, they're just going to go that way. And it's just going to be how it is, right? And they forget that it's an animal and that it has its own feelings and emotions and personality. Like, horses have different personalities just like people, right? So you get a horse that some horses are very willing and love having a job. And then sometimes you have a horse that just wants to hang out and chill and not work, or doesn't want to do much, or is really lazy. So you get different personalities just like people, right? And so, knowing that, you're working with an animal that has a personality and has different emotions, and also that because horses have different personality, just because you have a bad experience with one horse doesn't necessarily mean that all horses are like that. And so, you got to have a understanding that they have their own personalities just like people do. But then also it's a piece of advice I have and always tell people that are looking at learning more about horses is take the time to learn how to properly communicate with horses, and not just jump on and expect to go fast or go for a trail ride. Like, before we learn how to drive a car, we have to learn how to drive a car and take the steps, right? We also have to learn how do we communicate with this horse to properly tell them how to steer and go forward and do all this stuff. And a lot of people get on and they get frustrated because the horse isn't listening to them. And it's not that the horse isn't listening to them, it's that the horse doesn't know what they're asking. And they don't realize that they're asking the horse in a way that doesn't make sense to them. And so learning and taking lessons with someone that can teach you how to communicate with the horse rather than just getting on and just wanting to run and go fast, because this is what most people want to do, is get on the horse and just run or go for a trail ride, and they don't realize that it's important to know before you go outside how to tell the horse to go left, right, stop, how to handle if the horse does get scared or nervous, and not just expect it to operate like a machine or a car or something.
Two more questions as far as horses, then I want to get into a little bit to the book before we end the interview. As far as horse riding, how long did it take you to really master, riding? And then I want to also go into, right after that, after you answer that question, talk about, you spoke about equestrian. You are an equestrian as far as horseback riding. Can you explain what that is to the viewers, and how do you compete on horses? We see as far as horse racing, that's obviously not what you do with the Kentucky Derby, all that jazz. But can you just talk about what an equestrian is and how you compete, and also, as I said, about how long it took you to master horseback riding in general?
Yeah. Well, I think something to say is that, I don't know everything about horses. It's just like any field, right? Like, there's always more to learn. There's no way I can know absolutely everything about all breeds of horses, all disciplines, all training styles and methods, right? And so, like I'll still tell people, like, I still will take lessons and go to clinics, and still I'm always trying to learn. And a good horseman will always do that. They'll be the first ones to say that I don't know everything, right? If someone does say they know everything about horses, they don't know anything.
Right, but Michelle, like with your horse, like you know, and I assume this, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. You assume you know that horse like backwards and forwards. You know how it'll react to you doing one thing toward another thing, correct?
Yeah, and so gaining that skill and mastery, kind of, I guess, as you were saying, is I grew up showing and competing, and so I took lessons pretty regularly, and then would practice, at least 6 days a week, and then and then in college I took several classes. I went through the therapeutic riding program, the Colton training program, and so there's different areas in horsemanship that you can kind of learn mastery. And so I think working with young horses is very different than going and showing and competing in a specific discipline. And so for me, like, I love all aspects kind of horses, and love different disciplines for different reasons. Like, I don't ride just English or just Western. I I believe a good horseman or a good equestrian can ride, doesn't matter the tack, they can ride in any tack and any horse. And so, understanding that there may be different training philosophies and each discipline might be slightly different, but how you are asking the horse to do something and what you're doing there's a lot of overlap. And so that's kind of what I looked at in kind of the training philosophies that I've kind of implemented into my practice and my work is not the discipline, is more so the overarching of, commonality of it all. And so, I've been working with horses now for like 11 years. And, I would say, like I said, I'm always learning more, but, there's difference too in like learning something, but then also learning something in a way to be able to explain it to other people. And my certification training program really helped with me understanding, okay, I know I do this, but why do I do it? And how do I explain it to someone so they understand it? And so, there's the gaining the mastery of something, but then also understanding it in a way to explain it to someone else and also have them understand why do we do it this way? Or it's not like we're just doing it just because, right? And so, I think, the first few years were just me learning how to ride and show and compete and understanding that. And then I was learning kind of taking a horse from start to finish. And then it was more, okay, now how do I take this and explain it to someone else and how it makes sense? And, that's taken several years, and everyone's journey is different. There isn't really an exact, timeline by any means.
All right. Lastly, I want to talk about, we spoke a little bit about this earlier, but about the book. When is the book coming out? And also, how do you feel like in the book you really kind of, I know you tell your story, of course, but how do you feel like your story will help others that are suffering, whether it's burns or just self-esteem issues, or also, you are a life coach, having people achieve, more in their life than maybe they think rather in their mind they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm hoping the book comes out 2021. There is no exact date at this point. And so my story is written in a self-help format. And when I was really exploring and doing a lot of reflection on how I wanted to share my story, I wanted to share it with a sense of purpose and to help other people. And like I mentioned earlier, I didn't want it to be about my initial injury, because that's not what my story is. It's more so about the survivor moving forward. And so every story in my book is shared with a message and a self-help purpose. And so each chapter I say is a survivor lesson, and how does this lesson then help us get to the path of thriving? And so then I talk about each of those lessons in each chapter, and then I bring it back together and kind of say, why is it important to live this and understand this in order to thrive? And that would be kind of life coaching and speaking work in me is, we can be a survivor just by making the choice to be a survivor, but there are things in our life that we do implement to help us get closer to the path of thriving. And if we don't have those pieces, based on my personal experience, what I've learned is that then it's very easy to fall back into, survivor mode or into different victim tendencies, right? And so how do we, move past that in order to get into a path of thriving? And so the book is split into three parts. Part one defines what does it mean to be a survivor versus victim, and shares the initial part of my story. And then part two is the survivor lessons, and each chapter shares multiple or one story on the lesson that I'm talking about. And then part three kind of relates it all back to the reader and say, we all have different, victim tendencies in life, and we all have different struggles and things. How do we not let this get in our way on our path of thriving, right? And how do we take that last step? And using this bridge analogy, how do we take that, go from victim on one side of the bridge onto the survivor bridge, and then cross over the bridge into a life of thriving? And that concept kind of ties throughout the entire book.
So we spoke about how you help other people through being a life coach. How do you feel like what do you think your goals are as far as in life and your achievements that you want to be remembered for throughout your life right now?
Yeah, I have a lot of different goals, and I can see them maybe adapting or changing as life changes and grows. But my master's is in strategic leadership, and I'm finishing up my MBA in business administration. So I love to be able to combine kind of all the work that I'm doing, whether it's courses, life coaching, speaking, advocacy work, and then also do maybe eventually some consulting You know, and so helping people through the business aspect of it, not just on the, you know, the personal level, but also on that professional level. And so, you know, I like all my goals are kind of related and connected to that. And so that's kind of, I guess, the biggest goal I have right now with the career wise is, you know, I'm not necessarily sure the exact path on what that's going to look like or how it's going to look like, but the commonality I see with everything that I'm doing is to eventually do coaching, consulting, speaking, some writing, kind of combination of them all to help people with a greater focus.
So lastly, Michelle, and thank you so much for all the time. Where can people find more about you if they want to talk to you about, you know, your book or in general? Where can people find more about you? You on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, email, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I have my website, survivornotvictim.com, and then I'm on Facebook, Michelle Lauren, or Michelle Lauren Anderson, you can find me, or email would be the best way to get a hold of me. I'm not huge into Instagram or Twitter at this point, you know, at some point, but yeah, so you can find me there, and if you want to, you can put the links